Diplomacy usually dies behind closed doors, but for Marcus Sterling, it was about to die in the blood-soaked sands of an alien coliseum. He just did not know yet that his executioners had brought the absolute wrong man to the slaughter. Marcus opened his eyes to the harsh, unforgiving glare of a stark luminal grid. His back rested against cold, seamless composite metal. This was not the luxurious diplomatic suite the Valar High Council had promised upon his arrival to their homeworld. The air tasted sterile, laced with the sharp metallic tang of ozone and old copper. He sat up, shaking off the residual grogginess of whatever chemical cocktail they had used to knock him out during the summit gala. His first instinct was to check his vitals, a habit from a life he was supposed to have left behind. He reached to the base of his skull. The skin was raw. The biometric seal of his neural dampener was cracked. For 10 years, Marcus had played the role of the affable, soft-spoken Earth ambassador. He had worn tailored suits, sipped synthetic champagne, and smiled through thousands of hours of tedious trade negotiations. Underneath the tailored suits, suppressed by a microchip embedded in his brainstem, was a highly classified suite of military cybernetics. He was a relic of Earth's shadow wars, a ghost walking among politicians. Now, with the dampener damaged during his violent abduction, the ghost was waking up. A cold mathematical clarity washed over his mind. In his peripheral vision, diagnostic data streamed across his optical nerve. Threat assessment subroutines booted online. Microservos in his skeletal structure hummed, flushing his muscles with synthetic adrenaline. His heart rate, which should have been skyrocketing in panic, stabilized at a calm, lethal 60 beats per minute. The Valar thought they had kidnapped a bureaucrat. They had no idea what was actually sitting in their holding cell. And Marcus wondered just how many galactic laws he was about to break to survive the day. The seamless metal wall in front of him dissolved into a cascade of hexagonal light fragments. A figure stepped through the breach. She was imposing, even by Valar standards. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, her athletic frame was encased in the dark, iridescent armor of the Imperial handlers. Her skin possessed a subtle, metallic bluish hue, and her eyes were a piercing, pupilless amber. This was Lyra, a decorated veteran of the Valar border skirmishes, now relegated to managing the Empire's blood sports. She looked down at Marcus with a mixture of professional detachment and profound disdain. "Marcus Sterling," Lyra said, her voice a resonant, commanding alto that translated seamlessly through his auditory implants. "Representative of the United Earth Directorate, your presence is required above." Marcus remained seated on the floor. He rested his forearms on his knees, projecting an image of total relaxation. "I have to admit, Lyra, your hospitality is a significant downgrade from the brochures. I specifically requested a room with a view of the capital, not a subterranean dungeon." Lyra narrowed her amber eyes. The humans she had seen on the propaganda vids were frail, emotional creatures, prone to panic when separated from their technological comforts. This man was making jokes. "There is no view for you, human," she replied sharply. "There is no treaty. The peace accords were a fiction, a diplomatic ruse to draw your leadership out." Marcus did not flinch. His internal combat computer was already analyzing her stance, noting the slight imbalance in her heavy shoulder pauldrons and the fraction of a second delay in her right knee joint when she shifted her weight. She was favoring an old injury. "A ruse," Marcus repeated calmly. "So, you kidnapped an ambassador to do what, exactly? Extort Earth? The Directorate does not negotiate with terrorists, even the ones wearing shiny armor." "We do not want negotiations," Lyra stated, stepping closer. "We want an exhibition. The Valar Empire has grown restless. The High Council requires a unified purpose to mobilize the war fleet against your sector. We need to demonstrate to our citizens that humanity is a weak, inferior species, utterly incapable of defending its own borders. She gestured upward, toward the ceiling. You will be cast into the grand arena. You will face a creature of our choosing. You will be torn apart on a live planetary broadcast. When our people see how easily a champion of Earth bleeds, the motion for total war will pass unanimously. Marcus let out a short, genuine laugh. It echoed strangely in the sterile cell. Lyra's hand drifted instinctively toward the plasma sidearm on her hip. The reaction was subtle, but Marcus's enhanced optics caught the micro-movement. You brought an Earth diplomat to a gladiator pit to justify a galactic invasion, Marcus said, shaking his head. I have to say, the sheer theatricality of your political system is exhausting. Do you guys ever just hold a vote, or does every piece of legislation require someone getting eaten? Lyra's jaw tightened. You mask your terror with absurdity. It is a known human coping mechanism. I mask my boredom, Lyra, Marcus corrected, finally standing up. The micro-servos in his legs propelled him upward with fluid, predatory grace. He stepped within a few feet of her, forcing her to look slightly down at him. Let me ask you a question. You are a decorated soldier. I can see the campaign marks etched into your breastplate. Do you really believe the propaganda your council feeds you? Do you honestly think a species that survived its own nuclear adolescence is fragile? Lyra held her ground, but her pulse elevated. Marcus could hear the faint, rapid thrum of her alien heartbeat. I believe what I see, Lyra retorted, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I see a soft creature made of water and calcium. You will not last 3 minutes on the sands. Then why are you nervous? Marcus asked, tilting his head. Your right hand has been hovering 2 inches from your holster since you walked in. Your irises are dilating. If I am just a soft creature, why is the decorated Valar veteran treating me like an unpinned grenade? The observation struck her like a physical blow. She realized with a jolt that he was completely right. She was on edge. There was an unseen pressure radiating from this seemingly unarmed human, a quiet, terrifying intensity that defied every briefing she had ever read about his species. The seeds of doubt, tiny and sharp, took root in her mind. What if the High Council was wrong? What if they had dragged something terrible into their home? Before she could formulate a response, the floor beneath them shuddered violently. A low, concussive rumble reverberated through the very bedrock of the planet. The heavy, ancient mechanisms of the grand arena were engaging. Your time is up, Lyra said, stepping back, eager to put distance between herself and the unnerving human. The far wall of the holding cell began to retract, groaning against centuries of friction. A blinding shaft of sunlight pierced the subterranean gloom, casting long, harsh shadows across the floor. With the light came the noise. It was a physical force, a deafening oceanic roar of billions of Valar citizens screaming for blood. The sound rolled down the corridor, promising absolute violence. Heavy kinetic manacles deployed from the walls, snapping securely onto Marcus's wrists. The floor beneath him became a moving conveyance belt, slowly dragging him toward the blinding archway. Marcus looked back over his shoulder at Lyra. His expression was completely blank, devoid of fear, anger, or despair. Watch closely, Lyra, Marcus called out over the deafening roar of the crowd. I am going to show you exactly how fragile we really are. He turned back toward the light, rolling his shoulders as the kinetic manacles locked his arms to his sides. The combat subroutines in his mind flashed green, signaling optimal combat readiness. He was no longer Marcus Sterling, the affable diplomat. He was a weapon, uncaged and fully loaded, riding an automated belt straight into the jaws of the alien empire. The blinding light of the grand arena did not smell of glory. It reeked of copper, ozone, and a million unnecessary deaths. Marcus Sterling stepped onto the blood-stained sands, ready to disappoint an entire empire. The kinetic manacles retracted into the floor with a heavy mechanical clank, releasing his arms. Above him, the noise was a physical weight. The stadium was an architectural marvel of sheer, terrifying scale. A colossal amphitheater carved into the bedrock of the capital city, stretching up toward a shimmering atmospheric containment dome. Billions of Valar citizens were screaming with a unified, bloodthirsty fervor, their voices merging into a continuous, deafening roar. Hovering camera drones, sleek and predatory, darted through the air around him, transmitting his final moments to every screen, hololith, and personal device across the empire. Marcus took a slow, deep breath, letting the artificial air fill his lungs. His internal diagnostics were running flawlessly. The damage to his neural dampener, rather than handicapping him, had completely severed the software chains binding his combat augments. His optic nerves painted the arena in tactical overlays, calculating distances, structural weaknesses in the containment walls, and the exact friction coefficient of the blood-soaked sand beneath his boots. Across the vast expanse of the arena floor, massive iron gates began to grind upward. The crowd's roar doubled in intensity, vibrating right through Marcus's chest cavity. From the darkness of the subterranean holding pens emerged a scarn. It was a bioengineered nightmare, a creature synthesized from the genetic material of a dozen apex predators from conquered worlds. It weighed roughly 4 tons, moving on 6 heavily muscled limbs ending in scythe-like talons. Its body was armored in thick, iridescent black scales, and its jaw hung open to reveal rows of serrated, translucent teeth dripping with a caustic, acidic saliva. It was designed for one purpose: total, spectacular annihilation. The scarn let out a bellow that shook the loose sand from the arena walls and charged. Up in the handler's booth, suspended high above the arena floor behind a wall of transparent energy shielding, Lyra watched the monitors with a tight, expectant grip on her console. She had seen countless political prisoners, disgraced generals, and captured alien warriors face the scarn. They all did the exact same thing. They panicked. They ran. They screamed. They fired their provided underpowered weapons wildly until the beast simply rolled over them in a tide of muscle and teeth. She waited for the human to break, waiting for the frail diplomat to beg for a mercy the Valar High Council would never grant. Down on the sand, Marcus did not run. He did not even draw back. He simply adjusted his stance. His combat processor mapped the scarn's trajectory. Speed, 80 miles per hour. Mass, excessive. Center of gravity, heavily forward-leaning. Time to impact, 4 seconds. 3, 2. At the exact millisecond, the beast launched itself into a leaping strike, aiming to crush the human beneath its massive forelimbs. Marcus moved. He did not dive away in terror. He executed a flawless, geometrically perfect pivot. He stepped entirely out of the creature's kinetic slipstream. The scarn crashed into the sand exactly where Marcus had been standing a fraction of a second prior, carving a massive trench into the arena floor and sending a plume of fused glass and dirt into the air. The roaring crowd experienced a collective, localized confusion. A murmur rippled through the lower tiers. The human was supposed to be a red smear. Instead, the camera drones panned to show Marcus standing 30 feet away, calmly dusting a spray of sand from his tailored diplomatic trousers. The scarn recovered with terrifying speed, whipping its massive bulk around. But as it prepared to charge again, something profound and entirely unexpected happened to Marcus. A sharp, electric spike lanced through his cerebral cortex, It was not a malfunction of his cybernetics. The Grand Arena was enveloped in a massive, localized electromagnetic field, designed to contain the energy weapons of gladiators and project the broadcast signal across the planet. The intense ambient radiation was interacting wildly with his damaged, exposed neural implant. Suddenly, Marcus was not just seeing the beast, he was feeling it. A wave of pure, unfiltered emotion crashed into his consciousness, nearly dropping him to his knees. It was a psychic broadcast of absolute, blinding terror. It was accompanied by the sensation of agonizing, burning pain wrapping around his own neck. Marcus blinked away the invasive sensory data, his enhanced optics zooming in on the Skarn's thick, scaled neck. There, buried under layers of muscle, was a heavy metallic collar, pulsing with a dull red light. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. The Veiler were not releasing a mindless, bloodthirsty predator into the arena. They were torturing a sentient, terrified captive. The collar was flooding the creature's nervous system with agonizing pain-compliance signals, driving it into a blind, desperate frenzy. The disgust that washed over Marcus was colder and sharper than any combat drug. He shifted his posture, his hands raising into a relaxed, open-palm martial stance. He was no longer trying to evade the beast. He was going to dismantle its chains. The Skarn lunged again, its movements erratic and fueled by artificial agony. This time, Marcus stepped into the charge. He dropped to a low slide beneath the creature's primary striking talons, feeling the wind of the mist blow ruffle his hair. Using the beast's immense forward momentum against it, Marcus drove his cybernetically enhanced leg into the joint of the creature's middle limb. The strike did not break the bone, but it temporarily paralyzed the nerve cluster. The beast stumbled, its massive head dipping dangerously low. Marcus vaulted upward, his synthetic muscle fibers propelling him high into the air. He landed squarely on the armored ridge of the creature's back. The Skarn thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge the human, but Marcus clamped his legs around the thickest part of its neck. He reached forward with his left hand, his fingers sinking into the small gap between the creature's scales and the heavy metallic collar. His internal HUD highlighted the locking mechanism of the pain compliance device. It was heavily shielded, requiring industrial tools to remove. Marcus did not have tools. He had a right arm woven with carbon nanotube muscle fibers capable of generating thousands of pounds of per square inch kinetic force. He drew his fist back, calculated the exact structural fault line of the locking pin, and struck. The impact sounded like a detonating artillery shell. The shockwave rippled through the air, completely shattering the reinforced collar. Shards of metal and sparking circuitry exploded outward, raining down onto the sand. Marcus immediately kicked away, launching himself backward in a graceful arc, landing lightly on his feet several yards from the beast. The Skarn froze. The red, agonizing light was gone. The creature let out a long, shuddering exhale, a sound entirely devoid of aggression. It sank onto its belly, its massive, terrifying form suddenly looking incredibly small and exhausted. It looked at Marcus, its deep reptilian eyes wide not with predatory hunger but with profound relief. It lowered its head to the blood-stained sand in a clear, undeniable gesture of submission and gratitude. Silence fell over the Grand Arena. It was not a gradual quieting. It was a sudden, absolute cessation of sound, as if the air had been sucked out of the stadium. Billions of Valar citizens watching live in city squares, homes, and transit hubs across the Empire simply stopped breathing. The broadcast was capturing something utterly impossible. A fragile human had not only physically dominated a Skarn in hand-to-hand combat, but he had tamed it. He had shown an apex predator mercy. In the handler's booth, Lyra stood entirely paralyzed. Her amber eyes were wide, fixed on the monitors displaying the human standing calmly over the subdued monster. Her hands trembled over the console. Everything the High Council had ever taught her, every piece of military doctrine she had memorized about the inherent weakness and savagery of humanity, was fracturing in real time. She was watching a masterclass in power, delivered through the ultimate display of restraint. Marcus stood in the center of the silent arena, his eyes locked on the handler's booth high above. The connection in his mind was still active, leaving him wondering just how deep this newly awakened psychic resonance went, and what other buried secrets he was about to unearth on this world. Down in the depths of the stadium, the High Council's heavily armed security forces were surely scrambling to rectify this massive public relations disaster, meaning the real fight was only just beginning. The silence of a billion stunned spectators is a dangerous thing, but the absolute quiet of an alien holding cell is where revolutions are actually born. Marcus Sterling sat on the cold metal bench, wiping a smear of purple sand from his knuckles, waiting for the fallout. Heavy boots echoed down the corridor, lacking the disciplined rhythm of a standard patrol. The heavy door hissed open, and Lyra stepped inside. She locked the blast door behind her and engaged a localized privacy field. Her amber eyes were wide, and the pristine composure of the decorated Valar handler was fracturing. "You did not kill it," she said, her voice dropping to an urgent, hushed tone. "You broke the compliance collar and you walked away. The broadcast network is in total chaos." The High Council ordered the feed cut, but the delay was too long. Everyone saw. Marcus leaned back, resting his head against the wall. "I am sorry if I ruined the ratings. I have a strict policy against murdering enslaved prisoners." Lyra crossed the small space, her imposing frame tense. "It is a beast. A scarn is a mindless instrument of destruction." "It is a sentient being screaming in agony," Marcus corrected sharply, his affable diplomat persona completely vanishing. He tapped the base of his skull, right where the damaged neural dampener sat beneath his skin. "Your arena has a massive electromagnetic containment field. It is playing havoc with my internal hardware, and it acted like a giant antenna. I felt its mind, Lyra." The collar was not just making it aggressive. It was pumping liquid fire into its nervous system to force it to fight. The High Council is not giving your people a display of martial superiority. They are feeding you a theater of torture to distract you from the fact that they are stealing your future. Lyra stood frozen. To hear a human speak of neural hardware and psychic resonance was jarring enough, but his accusation struck at the very foundation of her military oath. She wanted to call him a liar, to defend the honor of the Valar Empire. But she had seen the creature bow. She had seen the raw, undeniable relief in the predator's eyes. She stepped closer, the rigid military spacing between them collapsing. Marcus noticed a small medical kit palmed in her left hand. She reached out, her cool, metallic blue fingers brushing against his jawline where a sharp piece of shrapnel from the exploding collar had left a shallow, bleeding graze. "Hold still," she commanded softly. Marcus did not move away. The proximity shifted the energy in the room. He could smell the ozone from her armor mixed with a faint, sharp scent like crushed pine needles. She applied a sterile gel to the cut, her touch surprisingly gentle for someone trained to manage monsters. "We are taught that humans are frail," Lyra murmured, her eyes briefly meeting his. "Creatures of soft flesh and volatile emotions. Yet you moved with the precision of a master duelist, and you showed mercy when you had the absolute advantage. That contradicts every tactical manual in the Imperial Library." "Your manuals are out of date," Marcus said, a wry smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Back on Earth, we learned a long time ago that true strength is not the capacity to destroy. Any idiot with a big enough gun can turn a city to ash. True strength is having the power to annihilate your opponent and choosing to extend an open hand instead." It requires far more discipline to spare a life than to end one. Lyra lowered the medical kit. The romantic tension hanging in the sterile air was palpable. A sudden magnetic pull between two warriors from opposite ends of the galaxy, realizing they shared the same core code of honor. She looked at his lips, then up to his eyes, her internal conflict waging a fierce war against her training. "They are going to kill you for embarrassing them," she whispered. "They are welcome to try." Marcus replied easily, "But I have a feeling the Valar military is about to have a very bad day." Lyra stepped back, her expression hardening with sudden resolve. She had made her choice. She accessed a secure data pad on her wrist gauntlet and pulled up a heavily encrypted tactical map. "The High Council is accelerating their timeline," she stated, her voice returning to its crisp, professional cadence. "The exhibition today was supposed to be the final justification. Even with the broadcast interrupted, they are pushing the narrative that you used some form of cowardly, illicit technology to disable the Skarn. The Warfleet is currently fueling in high orbit. They plan to slipspace jump to the Sol system in less than 2 hours. Marcus felt a cold spike of genuine alarm. A Valar invasion fleet appearing directly over Earth, especially when the Directorate thought they were negotiating peace, would result in billions of casualties. The geopolitical game was over. This was a countdown to extinction. "Then I need to get out of this cell and introduce the High Council to some human diplomacy," Marcus said, his synthetic muscles tensing. "You will not get the chance," Lyra countered. "They are sending you straight to the Apex trial. They are bypassing the standard gladiatorial roster and dropping you in with the Dread-Maw." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Dread-Maw. Catchy name. I assume it is not a giant fluffy rabbit." "It is a biological siege weapon," Lyra explained, ignoring his humor. "Engineered from the apex predators of a high-gravity death world. It stands 3 stories tall. It possesses armor thick enough to deflect anti-vehicular plasma rounds. It does not feel pain, and its neural compliance crown is wired directly into its brainstem. It is designed to shatter fortified bunkers. You cannot fight it. Marcus, you cannot outmaneuver it." "Good thing I brought my dancing shoes," Marcus replied, mentally calculating the physics of engaging a 3-story biological tank. Lyra reached into her armor plating and extracted a small, metallic disc. She pressed it firmly against the skin of his forearm. It looked exactly like a standard Valar medical patch, used to monitor vitals and administer combat stimulants. "This is not a bandage," Lyra said, her amber eyes locking onto his with fierce intensity. "It is a localized, high-yield electromagnetic jammer. I confiscated it from a smuggler 3 cycles ago and never logged it into the armory. If you can get close enough to the Dread-Maw to plant this directly onto its neural crown, it will permanently sever the Council's control signal, but you will have to be practically inside its jaws to place it." Marcus looked at the small disc, then back at the Valar handler who was risking execution for high treason simply by handing it to him. "Why are you doing this, Lyra?" he asked quietly. "If they find out, they will throw you in the arena next." "Because I swore an oath to protect the Valar Empire," she answered, standing tall. "And I am beginning to realize that the greatest threat to my people is not sitting in this cell. It is sitting in the council chambers." Before Marcus could respond, the heavy blast doors at the end of the corridor groaned in protest. The privacy field flickered and died. The rhythmic, thunderous marching of the Imperial vanguard echoed off the stone walls. These were not the standard arena guards. These were the Council's elite enforcers, clad in heavy mechanized armor and carrying rotary plasma cannons. They were not taking any chances. Lyra immediately stepped away from Marcus, her face a mask of cold, professional indifference. The Vanguard squad leader breached the cell, his weapon leveled directly at Marcus's chest. "The prisoner is required for the final exhibition," the squad leader barked, his voice distorted through his helmet's vocal modulator. "Secure him." Heavy kinetic manacles, far more robust than the previous set, slammed onto Marcus's wrists and ankles. He offered no resistance, allowing the massive guards to flank him. He caught one last glimpse of Lyra standing in the corner of the cell, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. She had handed him the key to surviving the unsurvivable. But as the guards shoved him toward the darkened tunnel leading to the arena's lowest level, Marcus knew that getting close to the Dread-Maw was going to require a miracle. And he was fresh out of those. A good day to die usually involves a little more warning and a lot less sand. For Marcus Sterling, the schedule had just been violently accelerated. He was shoved out of the darkened tunnel and back into the blinding glare of the grand arena. But the killing floor had completely transformed. The flat blood-stained sands were gone, replaced by a shifting holographic nightmare. Massive physical pistons and hard light projectors had churned the arena into a jagged, treacherous labyrinth of synthetic basalt columns, deep trenches, and neon-lit canyons, mimicking the harsh, unforgiving topography of a dead world. The Valar High Council was not just setting up an execution. They were designing a cinematic spectacle. The heavy containment doors on the far side of the artificial canyon began to grind open, revealing a cavernous darkness that seemed to swallow the ambient light. The ground did not just shake, it buckled. From the shadows emerged a biological siege weapon of incomprehensible scale. The Dread-Maw stood 3 stories tall, a hulking mass of overlapping carbon-dense bone plates and hyper-evolved muscle. It possessed no eyes, only smooth, armored sensory ridges that tracked electromagnetic pulses and body heat. Its jaw, lined with rows of dull, crushing molars the size of boulders, was engineered specifically to chew through reinforced vehicular armor. Bolted directly into the creature's thick skull was a massive neural compliance crown, a complex lattice of cruel alien machinery pulsing with a venomous, violet light. Marcus watched the colossal beast step into the arena, crushing a hard-light basalt column into digitized dust with a single careless stride. "I really should have asked for the giant fluffy rabbit," Marcus muttered to himself, his internal combat processors immediately flooding his optical nerve with threat assessments. The data was grim. The Dread-Maw's armored hide offered 0 vulnerabilities to small arms fire, let alone bare hands. Its stride length meant it could cover the distance between them in seconds, and its mass was simply unsurvivable. Marcus could not fight it. He had to climb it. The neural crown sparked with a fresh surge of violet electricity. The High Council was remote triggering the pain compliance. The Dread-Maw let out a deafening, localized shockwave of a roar that shattered the surface tension of the holographic projectors nearby. Its sensory ridges locked onto the elevated heat signature of Marcus's cybernetic core, and the living tank charged. Marcus bolted. He dove into the treacherous, shifting maze of the arena, his synthetic muscle fibers propelling him forward at speeds that blurred the camera drone feeds. The Dread-Maw pursued with terrifying, earth-shattering momentum, simply bulldozing through the synthetic basalt columns that Marcus desperately wove around. It was a brutal, fast-paced game of cat and mouse. Marcus slid beneath a sweeping, heavily armored tail that sheared the top off a nearby ridge, showering him in sparks and debris. He vaulted over a sudden, gaping trench, his internal gyroscope keeping him perfectly balanced as the ground literally shifted beneath his boots. The creature was too big, too fast, and entirely immune to exhaustion. Marcus needed elevation, and he needed it immediately. His tactical HUD highlighted a towering, slightly curved spire of synthetic rock situated near the arena's perimeter wall. He calculated the structural integrity of the pillar, the velocity of the pursuing beast, and his own maximum vertical leap. The math was incredibly tight, offering a margin of error measured in millimeters. Marcus sprinted directly toward the dead end of the arena wall, baiting the colossal predator into a full-speed ramming charge. The Dread-Maw took the bait, lowering its massive armored head like a battering ram, intending to crush the human against the unyielding containment shielding. At the very last possible millisecond, Marcus engaged the microservos in his legs to their absolute maximum threshold. He leapt straight up, launching himself 15 feet into the air. The Dread-Maw slammed into the base of the towering synthetic spire with the force of a kinetic strike. The impact shattered the pillar, sending massive chunks of debris raining down. But Marcus was already airborne, using the falling debris as stepping stones. He planted his boot on a tumbling boulder, kicked off, and soared over the beast's massive armored brow. He landed hard on the creature's broad back, his fingers desperately seeking purchase in the deep grooves between the carbon-dense bone plates. It felt like trying to ride a mechanical mountain during a localized earthquake. The Dread-Maw thrashed violently, confused by the sudden loss of its target and the unexpected weight on its spine. It reared up, attempting to scrape Marcus off against the high containment walls. Marcus flattened himself against the cold, rough armor, his synthetic grip locking his joints into place, fighting the immense gravitational pull. He began to crawl forward, inching his way up the thick muscular neck toward the glowing violet machinery of the neural crown. The air up here tasted of ozone and the creature's metallic, coppery sweat. Protective kinetic spikes flared from the beast's hide, forcing Marcus to weave his arms through a deadly obstacle course of razor-sharp bone. He reached the base of the skull. The neural crown was right in front of him, radiating a sickening, unnatural heat. He could see the thick cables plunging directly into the creature's brainstem, pumping raw agony into its nervous system. Marcus pulled the small, metallic disc, Lyra's confiscated jammer, from his pocket. Sensing the proximity to its control mechanism, the Dread-Maw snapped its head back in a violent, desperate spasm. Marcus lost his footing, his legs swinging out over a 3-story drop to the arena floor. He hung on by his left hand alone, the carbon nanotube fibers in his arm screaming against the sheer physical strain of holding his entire body weight against the beast's erratic movements. With a final monumental exertion of strength, Marcus hauled himself up, lunged forward, and slammed the metallic disc directly onto the primary control node of the crown. There was a brilliant, blinding flash of white electromagnetic interference. The high-yield jammer detonated its payload directly into the circuitry. The violet light of the crown flickered violently, sparked in a shower of molten copper, and died completely. The effect was instantaneous. The Dread-Maw froze mid-thrash. The colossal, unstoppable siege weapon went completely rigid, as if a master switch had been thrown. Its massive legs buckled. 3 stories of bioengineered muscle and heavy armor collapsed onto the holographic terrain, sending a concussive shockwave across the arena that knocked out half the active camera drones. Marcus rode the beast down, sliding off the armored snout and landing lightly on the synthetic basalt floor directly in front of the creature's massive jaws. Through the damaged seal of his neural dampener, the psychic connection reignited. But it was not the searing, white-hot agony he had felt with the scarn. This was a deep, overwhelming tide of absolute exhaustion. It was the crushing sorrow of a mind that had been enslaved since birth, forced to murder countless beings, drowning in an artificial rage it could never control. Then, cutting through the psychic sorrow, came a clear, resonant emotion. It was a weeping, desperate plea for it all to end, a silent beg for execution. Marcus looked up at the smooth, armored face of the beast. It lay there, completely exposed, expecting the final killing blow that its masters had conditioned it to anticipate upon defeat. Marcus did not raise a weapon. He did not boast to the camera drones hovering nervously at the perimeter. Instead, he walked forward, closing the final few feet between himself and the colossal predator. The Veiler crowd, anticipating a brutal execution, fell into a suffocating, breathless silence. Marcus reached out his right hand, completely unarmored and utterly human. He placed his palm flat against the cold, metallic bone of the Dread-Maw's snout. He let out a slow, calming breath, projecting every ounce of peace and safety he could muster back through the strange psychic tether connecting them. He patted the beast gently, twice, a universal gesture of reassurance. The Dread-Maw let out a long, shuddering sigh that ruffled Marcus's hair, and it lowered its massive head to rest entirely upon the ground in a gesture of absolute, uncoerced loyalty. The visual shock was devastating. A human diplomat had just faced down the pinnacle of Vylar military biology, and instead of killing it, he had offered it grace. The High Council's narrative of human bloodlust and frailty shattered into a million undeniable pieces across a billion screens. But up in the central command spires overlooking the city, the High Chancellor was already furiously bypassing standard security protocols to access the arena's automated defense grid, and deep in the stadium's subterranean levels. Lyra's unauthorized absence from her post had just triggered the internal security alarms. The exhibition was over, but the war for survival had officially begun. A profound display of mercy might win over 1 billion ordinary citizens, but to a corrupt government, it is simply an act of war. The High Council had lost the narrative, so they decided to immediately delete the author. The holographic terrain of the grand arena flickered and died, replaced by the harsh, flashing crimson of emergency override protocols. From the high perimeter walls, heavy automated plasma turrets descended from concealed hatches, tracking the human and the beast. The massive containment doors at all 4 compass points ground open, spilling platoons of elite Imperial Vanguard shock troops onto the synthetic basalt floor. They were not carrying the standard stun batons used to prod gladiators. They were carrying rotary plasma cannons and shoulder-mounted anti-armor rocket pods. Marcus felt the atmospheric shift in the arena, but more importantly, he felt the sudden, alarming spike of defensive panic radiating from the Dread-Maw through their newly forged, localized psychic tether. The colossal beast shifted its massive weight, aggressively attempting to place its heavily armored bulk between Marcus and the incoming firing squads. It was willing to absorb the artillery fire to protect the only creature that had ever shown it kindness. "I appreciate the sentiment," Marcus said aloud, tapping the side of his head to fully engage his targeting subroutines. "But you are a bit too large to play bodyguard. Let us try something else." Marcus's optical implants mapped the firing arcs of the automated turrets and the troop formations flooding the sands. He fed a raw, conceptual push of tactical geometry directly through the neural tether. He did not use words. He transmitted the abstract concepts of trajectory, cover, and suppressive force. The Dread-Maw understood instantly. Instead of standing as a static shield, the beast became a mobile artillery platform. It swept its massive armored tail in a devastating arc, launching a barrage of shattered synthetic basalt boulders directly into the path of the incoming plasma fire. The superheated projectiles intercepted the plasma bolts in midair, creating a temporary wall of molten slag and blinding smoke. Marcus sprinted into the chaotic smokescreen, moving with a fluid, terrifying efficiency. He was no longer playing defense. He darted between the massive, stomping legs of his new ally, using the Dread-Maw as moving cover. As the beast crushed a squad of Vanguard troops beneath its heavy footfalls, Marcus vaulted off its knee joint, achieving an elevated firing angle. He had stripped a heavy plasma rifle from a fallen guard moments before, and his cybernetic targeting systems locked onto the automated turrets. He fired with mathematical precision, blinding the automated defenses one by one before dropping back into the shadow of the colossal predator. They were executing an unprecedented interspecies tactical coordination, and the Valar guards were completely outmatched. High above the chaos, in the primary control spire overlooking the stadium, Lyra was already moving. Her commanding officer, a hardened Valar general with zero tolerance for failure, was screaming orders into his command console, demanding a localized orbital strike on the stadium floor to vaporize the embarrassment. Lyra did not hesitate or attempt to argue. She crossed the room in 3 fluid strides. The general reached for his sidearm, but Lyra bypassed his personal kinetic shield with a specialized, brutal martial strike she had perfected in the border wars. She delivered a precise, crushing blow to his primary nerve cluster, rendering him instantly unconscious before he could draw his weapon. 2 other broadcast technicians jumped from their seats in alarm, but Lyra already had her plasma pistol leveled directly at the main transmitter relay. "Step away from the consoles," Lyra ordered, her amber eyes burning with absolute uncompromising conviction. The technicians complied, raising their hands and backing away. Lyra holstered her weapon and her fingers danced across the holographic interface. She was not just trying to stop the slaughter on the sands below. She was going to expose the architects of it. The High Council relied on tightly controlled information to maintain their grip on the Empire. Lyra was about to break the dam. She bypassed the High Council's censorship filters with a heavy military decryption key she had stolen from the general's belt. Then, she reached into the system architecture and locked onto Marcus's cybernetic optical telemetry. Because his neural dampener was damaged, his internal HUD was broadcasting an unencrypted data stream. Lyra captured it. She did not stop there. Utilizing the arena's massive electromagnetic containment field, she isolated the raw telepathic frequency vibrating between Marcus and the Dread-Maw. With a final, decisive keystroke, Lyra merged the human's raw visual feed with the beast's emotional broadcast and blasted it across every single open frequency on the planet. In the bustling streets of the Valar capital, on the high-speed transit rails, and in millions of private homes, the state-sponsored news feeds dissolved. They were replaced by Marcus's tactical HUD, showing the terrifying, unprovoked assault by the vanguard troops, proving the human was fighting defensively against a corrupt military apparatus. But accompanying the visual was a profound, overwhelming wave of raw emotion. The Valar citizens did not just see the Dread-Maw fighting. They felt it. They experienced its decades of enslaved agony, its sudden, overwhelming relief at being spared by a supposed enemy, and its fierce, pure loyalty toward the human diplomat. It was a weaponized dose of absolute truth. Decades of anti-Earth propaganda, painting humans as volatile, bloodthirsty savages dissolved in a matter of seconds. The citizens felt the undeniable honor of the Earth ambassador and the profound cruelty of their own leaders. Back on the arena floor, Marcus knew they could not win a battle of attrition. More troops were pouring in, and the orbital strike the general had requested might still be winding its way through the chain of command. They needed an exit, and they needed it immediately. Marcus's optical sensors scanned the perimeter, identifying a critical structural flaw in the eastern containment wall. It was a massive seam in the reinforced concrete, deeply weakened by the earlier holographic terraforming process and the Dread-Maw's initial ramming charge. He projected the concept of a battering ram into the Dread-Maw's consciousness, pairing it with the specific coordinates of the weakened wall. The beast let out a rumbling, concussive roar of acknowledgement that rattled the remaining teeth in the guards' heads. It lowered its heavily armored skull, gathered every ounce of its terrifying biological mass, and charged the eastern wall at full velocity. Marcus vaulted onto the creature's back just as it struck. The impact shattered the remaining containment shielding like brittle glass. The reinforced concrete obliterated outward in a massive cloud of dust and debris, blasting a colossal ragged hole directly into the dimly lit, labyrinthine underbelly of the lower city limits. The Dread-Maw thundered through the breach, carrying Marcus into the neon-lit, steam-choked industrial sector of the capital, leaving the ruined arena and a highly confused military force behind them. They were out of the killing jar, but their survival had just evolved into a planetary manhunt. As the dust settled in the arena, Lyra stared at the blinking monitors in the control room, knowing her treason was now fully documented and permanently irreversible. She had effectively declared war on her own government, and she wondered exactly how many minutes she had left before the Council's elite death squads kicked down the control room door to collect her head. The underbelly of the Valar capital was a place where light went to die and desperate secrets went to hide. Unfortunately for Marcus Sterling, hiding a 3-story biological siege weapon required a lot more than a few shadows. The air down in the industrial sector was thick with a toxic, corrosive smog, illuminated only by the bleeding neon hues of immense advertising hololiths and the angry orange glow of subterranean fusion vents. Massive, rusted pipes the size of civilian transport ships lined the cavernous transit tunnels, carrying coolant to the opulent upper city. Marcus moved with measured speed, navigating the labyrinthine catwalks while the Dread-Maw stalked closely behind him. For a creature weighing thousands of pounds, the beast possessed an eerie, predatory grace, its heavy footfalls completely muffled by the damp, fungal growth blanketing the concrete floor. They needed a sanctuary, and they found one in the hollowed-out shell of a decommissioned atmospheric processor. The chamber was dark, damp, and perfectly insulated against thermal scanners. Marcus signaled the colossal predator to halt, and the Dread-Maw obediently folded its massive limbs beneath its body, resting its heavily armored chin on the floor with a heavy, metallic sigh. A high-pitched mechanical whine echoed from a ventilation shaft high above them. Marcus immediately raised his stolen plasma rifle, his combat augment snapping a targeting reticle over the grate. The metal cover was kicked away, and a figure dropped 20 feet to the floor, executing a flawless, kinetic dampening roll. Lyra stood up, dusting rust from her iridescent dark armor. Her uniform was scorched, and a shallow plasma burn scored the left side of her breastplate, a testament to her violent exit from the command spire. "I have officially resigned my commission," Lyra announced, her breathing slightly elevated but her voice perfectly level. Marcus lowered his rifle, a genuine smile breaking through his stoic diplomat facade. "I certainly hope you get to keep the pension. The benefits package for high treason usually leaves a lot to be desired." Lyra walked toward him, the tension in her shoulders finally beginning to unwind in the dim, isolated safety of the chamber. She looked at the colossal Dread-Maw resting peacefully in the corner, then back at Marcus. The adrenaline of the escape was fading, leaving behind the crushing, unavoidable reality of their situation. She had burned her entire life to the ground. She was a fugitive from the empire she had sworn to protect. Stranded in the toxic slums with an alien spy and an illegal siege weapon, she unclasped her heavy shoulder pauldrons, letting them clatter to the metal floor. She closed the distance between them, stepping firmly into his personal space. "My people are going to hunt us until the end of time," Lyra said quietly, her amber eyes searching his face. "The High Council has deployed the Shadow Guard. They are elite trackers, equipped with neural scorchers and orbital surveillance uplinks. We have perhaps an hour before they grid search this entire sector." "Then we make the most of the hour," Marcus replied softly. He reached up, his fingers gently brushing a streak of soot and dried blood from her cheekbone. It was a gesture of profound, unguarded intimacy, stripping away the armor they both wore. Lyra did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, finding an unexpected grounding warmth in his human hand. The universe outside the rusted walls was descending into absolute chaos. But in the quiet dark of the processor tank, the political lines dividing their species vanished. They were just two soldiers who had chosen the difficult, honorable path, recognizing that their survival now depended entirely on their absolute trust in one another. Lyra reached up and gripped his wrist, her thumb tracing the edge of his kinetic bracer. She leaned forward, and their lips met in a brief, fierce kiss that sealed their unspoken pact. It was not a promise of a future, but a mutual declaration that if they were going to burn, they would do it together. Suddenly, Marcus violently tore himself away, stumbling backward against a rusted bulkhead. He gripped the sides of his head as a blinding spike of raw sensory data flooded his visual cortex. His damaged neural dampener was malfunctioning wildly, but this was not pain. It was a terrifying, disjointed cascade of images that had not happened yet. Through the psychic tether connecting him to the beast, Marcus experienced a violent, hyper-accelerated evolution of his augmented perception. The Dread-Maw, engineered for the most hostile death worlds in the galaxy, possessed a nervous system that processed threat vectors faster than linear time. By reading microscopic shifts in air pressure, electromagnetic field distortions, and ambient thermal changes, the creature's brain was actively predicting the immediate future. Because Marcus was linked to it, he was seeing the exact same tactical forecast. He saw a blinding flash of violet light. He saw a squad of 6 Valar shadow guards rappelling from the northern ceiling hatch in exactly 40 seconds. He saw the lead soldier throw a localized singularity grenade that would cleanly vaporize the left side of Lyra's torso. Marcus blinked, the terrifying vision dissolving back into the dim reality of the empty chamber. He looked at the northern ceiling hatch. It was closed and silent. "Marcus?" Lyra asked, her hand instantly dropping to her sidearm, sensing his sudden shift in demeanor. "What is it?" "They are already here," Marcus ordered, his voice snapping back to the cold mathematical cadence of a battlefield commander. "Northern hatch, 6 hostiles. They are going to breach in exactly 30 seconds. Move to the eastern pipeline and stay entirely out of sight." He did not need to speak to the Dread-Maw. He simply projected the tactical geometry of the impending ambush through their mental link. The massive beast rose silently, its heavy camouflage scales rippling as it scaled the reinforced walls of the chamber, wedging its enormous bulk into the deep, shadowy recess directly above the northern entry point. Marcus took his position behind a dense stack of thermal coils, his rifle raised. 5 seconds. 4. 3. The northern hatch blew inward with a synchronized silenced detonation. 6 elite shadow guards dropped through the opening on monofilament lines, their weapons raised, their movements fluid and deadly. They landed with practiced precision, fanning out into a textbook breach formation. The lead soldier reached for a grenade on his belt. They were exactly where the vision promised they would be. The ambush was mathematically perfect and devastatingly brief. The Dread-Maw dropped from the ceiling like a 3-story anvil made of teeth and armored bone. It crushed 3 of the elite soldiers instantly beneath its sheer mass before they even registered a threat from above. Simultaneously, Marcus stepped out from behind the thermal coils. Knowing exactly where the remaining guards would instinctively dive for cover, he fired 3 consecutive, hyper-accurate plasma bursts. The superheated bolts struck the soldiers in the chest plates before their boots even hit the ground. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 seconds. The elite pursuit team was annihilated without firing a single shot in return. Lyra emerged from the eastern pipeline, her sidearm drawn, staring at the smoking crater and the neutralized guards. She looked at Marcus, her tactical mind struggling to process the impossible speed and prescience of his counterattack. "How did you know their exact entry vector?" she asked, kicking a fallen rotary cannon away from one of the bodies. "My new friend has excellent intuition," Marcus said, tapping the side of his head. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and began stripping the fallen guards of their high-yield thermal charges and encrypted communication relays. But this was just the scouting party. The council will send a battalion next. Lyra pulled up a holographic map from a salvaged datapad. There is a subterranean maglev rail 2 miles from here. It connects to the outer wastelands. If we board a cargo transport, we can disappear into the toxic storms. The council's sensors cannot track us out there. We can survive. Marcus paused, holding a heavy thermal charge in his hand. He looked at the map, then he looked up through the rusted grating toward the distant, unseen ceiling of the Undercity. Far above them, beyond the smog and the neon, the Valar war fleet was finalizing its fueling sequence. We can survive, Marcus agreed quietly. But if we run, the war fleet jumps to the Sol system. They will orbitally bombard Earth until the oceans boil. Surviving at the cost of your home is just a delayed death sentence. Lyra, it is not enough to just walk away from tyrants. You have to break their weapons. Lyra met his gaze, the weight of his words settling heavily upon her. He was right. Running away was a betrayal of the very moral core they had just fought so hard to defend. The fleet is commanded from the central planetary spire, Lyra stated, her finger tracing a glowing line on the holographic map that led directly into the heavily fortified heart of the capital. It is the most heavily defended structure in the Empire. Anti-aircraft batteries, kinetic shielding, and a garrison of 10,000 vanguard troops. Marcus smiled, a dangerous, reckless expression that belonged to a man with nothing left to lose. He tossed the thermal charge to Lyra, who caught it effortlessly. Good, Marcus said, turning to the Dread-Maw, which let out a low, eager rumble that vibrated the metal floorboards. Then we know exactly where to point the battering ram. They had stopped running. The highest stronghold in the Empire awaited them, completely unaware that a dead diplomat, a disgraced soldier, and a liberated monster were coming to tear it down from the inside out. But as Marcus checked the charge on his stolen plasma rifle, he could not help but wonder what other dormant horrors the Council kept locked away in the Spire's darkest vaults, and exactly how much collateral damage a profound moral lesson was going to require. Infiltrating an impenetrable fortress is a mathematical impossibility, but mathematics rarely account for a 3-story biological battering ram with a vendetta. Marcus Sterling and his highly illegal strike team did not just knock on the front door of the central planetary spire. They completely erased it from the architectural blueprints. The spire was a monolith of dark, light-absorbent metal piercing the toxic clouds of the lower city and reaching into the pristine stratosphere. It was defended by overlapping kinetic shields and a garrison of 10,000 vanguard troops. Lyra handled the digital locks, utilizing the encrypted relays scavenged from the fallen shadow guards. She fed false telemetry data into the perimeter defense grid, creating phantom incursions on the opposite side of the capital. By the time the Vanguard Command realized the distraction, Marcus had already mapped the blind spots in the primary anti-aircraft batteries. Moving with lethal cybernetic precision, he disabled the automated sentry turrets lining the Grand Concourse, firing pinpoint plasma bursts that melted the targeting optics without triggering the pressure alarms. He was an artist of localized destruction, clearing the path for the real heavy artillery. The Dread-Maw did not require stealth. When they reached the massive, foot-thick composite blast doors sealing the lower elevator banks, the colossal beast simply lowered its armored head and applied forward momentum. The carbon-dense bone plates sheared through the reinforced locking mechanisms like wet paper. Metal groaned and snapped, giving way to the raw, bioengineered power of an apex predator that had spent its entire life confined, now finally unleashed against its jailers. Next time I host a diplomatic summit, I am definitely bringing one of these, Marcus noted casually, stepping over the shattered remains of the blast doors. They rode the massive freight elevator meant for heavy munitions, ascending rapidly toward the command chamber. The air grew thinner and colder. Lyra reloaded her sidearm, her jaw set in a rigid line. She was leading a foreign operative to the absolute nerve center of her government, an act that weighed heavily on her soul, yet her amber eyes held no regret. She looked at Marcus, finding reassurance in the calm, measured rhythm of his breathing. The elevator shuddered to a halt at the apex of the spire. The doors parted, revealing a vast circular command center bathed in the cool blue light of orbital hololiths. Beyond the sweeping, transparent armor-glass windows, the massive Valar war fleet hung in the upper atmosphere, a terrifying armada of sleek, predatory warships fueling for an interstellar jump. At the center of the room stood the High Chancellor, a tall, gaunt figure draped in ceremonial robes of crimson and gold. He was surrounded by a dozen of his most elite royal guards, but they were already backing away. The sight of the human, the traitorous handler, and the monstrous Dread-Maw spilling from the elevator was enough to break their legendary discipline. The Chancellor did not retreat. His hand hovered over a glowing control console. He was in the process of entering the final irreversible launch codes. "You are too late, human," the Chancellor sneered, his voice dripping with aristocratic venom. "The slipspace drives are spun up. The coordinates for your homeworld are locked. In 20 minutes, the skies over Earth will burn, and the Valar Empire will finally have its glorious, unifying war." Marcus did not hesitate. He raised his plasma rifle, the targeting reticle locking perfectly onto the center of the Chancellor's chest. His finger rested millimeters from the trigger. The kinetic math was simple. One shot, one dead dictator, and the launch sequence could be halted. But as Marcus stared down the barrel of his weapon, the political reality of the situation crashed into his combat-driven mind. The cameras in the command center were live, broadcasting to the fleet admirals in orbit and the military tribunals below. If he pulled the trigger, he would assassinate the head of the Valar state in cold blood. He would validate every single piece of propaganda the Council had ever broadcast. He would prove that humans were nothing more than savage, murderous assassins. The Chancellor would become a martyr, and the admirals would launch the fleet out of sheer, unadulterated vengeance. The Chancellor knew this. He smiled, a thin, cruel expression of absolute triumph. "Do it," he goaded, spreading his arms wide. "Pull the trigger, show my military exactly what you are. Strike me down, and you guarantee the annihilation of your species." Faced with a profound moral dilemma, Marcus lowered his rifle. The tactical subroutines in his brain screamed at him to eliminate the threat. But his human conscience, the very thing that made him more than a machine, demanded a different path. "I am a diplomat," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the tense room. "I came here to build a bridge, not to dig a grave." He turned to Lyra. "Get to the secondary consoles. We need to reroute the launch commands." Lyra sprinted toward the glowing databanks, her fingers flying across the holographic interfaces. "The primary sequence is biometric," she called back, panic edging into her voice. "It is hard locked to the Chancellor's genetic signature. I cannot stop the countdown from here. Only the fleet admirals in orbit have the authority to manually belay the order. But they are completely deaf to all ground communications." The Chancellor laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "You are playing with consoles while your world prepares to burn. Such pathetic, futile gestures." Marcus ignored him. He looked at the massive orbital hololiths displaying the warships. He looked at the locked communication arrays. Then, he looked up at the Dread-Maw. The colossal beast rumbled softly, sensing the humans' distress. The command center was equipped with the most powerful subspace communication array on the planet, designed to transmit orders instantly across star systems. Marcus realized he did not need a microphone. He needed an amplifier. He walked directly toward the main communication spire jutting from the center of the room. He reached out and grabbed the raw, exposed data conduits, ignoring the warning sparks that danced across his kinetic bracers. The Chancellor scoffed, assuming the human was simply trying to physically rip the machinery apart in a final act of desperation. Marcus turned to the Dread-Maw and established the psychic tether, opening his mind completely to the immense, bioengineered neural network of the beast. "Amplify it," Marcus ordered through the link. The Dread-Maw stepped forward, pressing its heavily armored snout against Marcus's back. The psychic resonance between them spiked, fueled by the raw processing power of the command center's array. The blue lights of the orbital hololiths began to violently flicker and distort as pure, unadulterated psychic energy overrode the digital systems. Marcus channeled every ounce of his humanity. Every memory of Earth's blue skies, every bitter lesson learned from a lifetime of warfare, and the profound, world-shattering mercy he had shared with the beast in the arena. He did not broadcast words. He broadcast raw, undeniable truth. He projected the memory of the Skarn's agony, the cruelty of the compliance collars, the deceit of the High Council, and his absolute, unwavering desire for peace. He blasted this massive, emotional data packet straight up into the stratosphere, bypassing the encrypted communication channels and beaming it directly into the unprotected minds of the fleet admirals sitting in their orbital command chairs. The physical strain on Marcus was immense. His cybernetic implants whined in protest, bleeding heat as his human brain acted as a conduit for a planetary transmission. Blood trickled from his nose, and his vision began to blur. He was pouring his very soul into the cold void of space, gambling the fate of two worlds on the desperate hope that the Valar military possessed a conscience hidden beneath their rigid discipline. The countdown timer on the main console ticked down to 60 seconds, bathing the room in an ominous, pulsing red light. Marcus held the connection, refusing to break the mental link even as his knees threatened to buckle, leaving him to wonder if his silent scream for peace was loud enough to pierce the armored hulls of 1,000 warships. A ticking clock is the loudest sound in the universe when it is counting down to the end of a world. But sometimes, the absolute silence that follows is even more deafening. The massive holographic timer in the center of the command spire ticked relentlessly toward 0. 50 seconds. 40 seconds. The ambient lighting of the room pulsed with an angry, apocalyptic crimson. Marcus Sterling remained anchored to the communication array, his physical body acting as a fragile organic bridge for an unprecedented telepathic broadcast. Blood flowed freely from his nose, staining his tailored diplomatic shirt. The sheer processing strain of forcing a localized psychic tether into a planetary-scale transmission was slowly tearing his synthetic nervous system apart. He was burning his own mind to save two civilizations. Up in the cold, unforgiving vacuum of high orbit, aboard the heavily armored bridges of 1,000 Valar warships, something impossible was happening. The fleet admirals, hardened veterans of a dozen conquest campaigns, were abruptly ripped from their rigid military protocols. They did not receive a data packet or a decrypted audio file. They received a raw, unfiltered injection of pure empathy. They felt the agonizing white-hot burn of the neural compliance collars. They felt the crushing, lifelong despair of the beasts forced to slaughter for entertainment. They tasted the copper and ozone of the arena sands. And most importantly, they felt the absolute, undeniable restraint of the human standing in the blood-soaked dirt, choosing grace over vengeance. It was a psychic shockwave of undeniable truth, shattering decades of carefully constructed propaganda in a matter of seconds. Back in the spire, the High Chancellor watched the human bleeding onto the console. He scoffed, his gaunt face twisted in a mask of aristocratic arrogance. 30 seconds. He believed the military machine he had built was completely immune to sentimentality. He believed the gears of war, once set into motion, could never be halted by something as fragile as the truth. 20 seconds. 10 seconds. Marcus's vision faded to a static gray. His knees finally buckled, and he collapsed to the cool metal floor, the psychic connection snapping violently. The Dread-Maw let out a soft, mournful rumble, stepping forward to shield the fallen diplomat. Lyra rushed to his side, her hands frantically checking the damaged biometric seal at the base of his skull. 5 seconds. 4. 3. The Chancellor raised his arms, ready to welcome the fiery dawn of his new, terrifying empire. At 2 seconds, the entire command center plunged into total darkness. The apocalyptic crimson light vanished. A heavy, localized silence descended upon the room. The massive orbital hololiths flickered, rebooted, and returned in a calm, neutral blue. The telemetry data streaming across the screens changed drastically. The slipspace drives of the Armada were spinning down. The targeting locks on the Sol system were universally disengaged. The weapon bays were closing shut. The Chancellor stared at the screens, his mouth agape. He slammed his fists against the primary console, screaming for the automated systems to override the fleet, demanding the admirals be executed for cowardice. He spun around, pointing a trembling finger at the captain of his elite royal guard, ordering them to execute the human and the traitorous handler immediately. The guards did not raise their weapons. They had been in the room. They had been bathed in the localized psychic shockwave radiating from the beast and the human. They had felt the profound, sickening truth of their own government. The captain of the guard stepped forward, moving with deliberate, unhurried precision. He did not draw his sidearm. Instead, he detached a pair of heavy kinetic manacles from his belt. He grabbed the High Chancellor by the wrists and locked them tightly, effectively decapitating the corrupt regime without firing a single shot. The sudden, bloodless collapse of the Valar High Council was complete. Marcus stirred on the floor, coughing violently as his internal cybernetics slowly rebooted and purged the excess heat from his system. Lyra helped him to his feet, her arm wrapped firmly around his waist to keep him steady. He looked at the Chancellor, who was now stripped of his authority, a small, pathetic man bound in the very chains he had used to enslave his entire world. Marcus wiped the blood from his chin, his voice raspy but carrying the unmistakable weight of undeniable authority. He looked the fallen dictator directly in the eyes. "You built an empire on the belief that cruelty was power," Marcus said, his words ringing through the silent command center. "But true power is not the ability to destroy an enemy. Any coward can issue a launch code from a reinforced bunker. True power is the absolute restraint required to show mercy when you are holding the blade." The weeks that followed reshaped the political landscape of the entire galaxy. With the corrupt council dismantled and the truth exposed, the Valar military stood down. The massive planetary broadcast had fundamentally shifted the cultural consciousness of the Empire. Earth and the Valar homeworld did not engage in a shadow war. Instead, they opened genuine, transparent peace negotiations. The heavy iron gates of diplomacy swung open, built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than mutual assured destruction. Lyra, having exposed the greatest conspiracy in Valar history, was unanimously chosen to spearhead the new provisional government. She traded her handler armor for the robes of a leader, bringing the fierce, uncompromising honor she had learned in the border wars to the chaotic theater of planetary politics. She outlawed the Grand Arena on her first day in office, ordering the immediate removal of all neural compliance collars and establishing vast, protected sanctuary zones for the bioengineered beasts. Marcus Sterling stood on the grand balcony of the newly repurposed diplomatic spire, the cool evening wind whipping at his coat. He was no longer a shadow operative hiding behind a tailored suit. He was simply an ambassador, entirely whole and finally at peace. Lyra stepped onto the balcony beside him, slipping her hand effortlessly into his. Below them, the Valar capital stretched out in a glittering ocean of light, completely free of the toxic smog and oppressive propaganda that had choked it for decades. Resting comfortably in the massive, fortified courtyard 1,000 feet below, the Dread-Maw slept peacefully. Its colossal chest rose and fell in a steady, unburdened rhythm, completely free from the artificial agony of its past. Dreaming of open skies instead of concrete walls, Marcus looked up at the night sky, watching the stars burn with a quiet, persistent brilliance. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and interconnected. The peace they had secured was just the beginning of a much larger, infinitely more complex journey. There were countless other worlds waiting in the dark, harboring strange phenomena and untested alliances, leaving Marcus to wonder what other impossible frontiers humanity was destined to cross, and what other monsters simply needed a friend. Thank you so much for watching this story unfold. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share the video with your friends. Leave a comment down below with the word mercy so I know you made it all the way to the end. And do not forget to hit that hype button so this video can reach more sci-fi fans just like you. I will see you in the next adventure.